Prior to beginning the activity, please be sure to review the faculty information and disclosure statements, as well as the learning objectives. After listening to the activity, complete the post-test by clicking the Earn Credit link in the episode description. Downloadable slides and resources are also available. The following presentation is copyrighted by Medscape. No use, broadcast, or recording of this presentation or any part thereof is permitted without the written authorization of Medscape.
The following presentation is part of a certified educational activity provided by Medscape Education and supported by an educational grant from Mardona.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Greg Poland. I'm the Mary Lowell Leary Emeritus Professor of Medicine and Infectious Diseases at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, Director of the Mayo Vaccine Research Group, and the Editor-in-Chief of the journal Vaccine. Today, we're going to be talking about COVID-19 vaccines and evolving landscape, and in particular, about evidence-based approaches to communication around vaccines. To do that, I'm joined by a friend and colleague, Dr. Saad Omer, who's director of the Yale Institute for Global Health, the Associate Dean at the Yale School of Medicine, and the Susan Dwight Bliss Professor of Epidemiology of Global Diseases, Yale School of Public Health. Welcome, Saad.
My pleasure. It's always good to talk to you, Greg.
Well, we're going to talk today about the pandemic versus what's been called the infodemic. We have a huge challenge globally with dealing with this pandemic, but with misinformation and disinformation, that challenge has been amplified. We need to appreciate that this is a new disease and a new disease syndrome, and we're all learning as we go along. So the question that arises for many of us as practitioners, how do we communicate around vaccines that's both scientific, but also practical to use in the clinic exam room? How do we be approachable and reassuring to our patients? How do we partner with our patients, establish trust, and ensure that they are armed with the right information so they make the best informed decisions? So let's start with this. This is certainly not the first pandemic. This is the fourth one in my lifetime, but it certainly is one of the first in this age of mass communication and information. So, Saad, what would you say are some of the challenges around communicating about vaccines, particularly novel vaccines like these COVID vaccines?
Well, there are several challenges that existed even before social media. So there were rumors, there was misinformation, and there was disinformation. And I'll go into the definitions of each of these a little bit later. But the digital communication age, the social media age, can really catalyze the spread of false information. And and it can not just amplify but create new narratives, and thus erode public trust in vaccines. A couple of nuances there. So when we think of social media, we often think of Twitter and Facebook, but increasingly things like TikTok, things like entities like WhatsApp, where there's close family groups, and so there is a higher level of trust, etc. And media that we don't usually think of as social media, but they behave like social media, such as YouTube. Because remember, the comment section of YouTube has been substantially changed over the years, and now people interact more with it, and sort of and who can post and who is posting that with the with increasing access of cell phone cameras, etc., and recording instruments. That can really amplify stuff, and the dose is higher in a YouTube video than social media.
Yeah, no question. Completely agree with you. We also, see the age of celebrities where people totally uninformed on the science aspect feel free to take to these social media platforms and give their opinions. And they do, as you say, they form new narratives. So, Saad, you mentioned and alluded to categories of misinformation. Maybe speak to those and what dangers they present.
Yeah, so there are different sort of categories, or there are different definitions that describe related phenomena. So, first of all, information is essentially conventionally thought of as data with meaning. Rumor, on the other hand, is unverified information, and stories that spread, often spread through a group or a population or a network of, a family network or a social network, not necessarily in terms of a digital sense as well, but sometimes through that. Misinformation is defined as accidental falsehoods. And disinformation is deliberate, engineered falsehood circulated with malicious intent. So often, we use, often in public discussion, misinformation is either used separately as disinformation, but sometimes as an umbrella term as well. So just to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I like those categories. I think those are very helpful. So let's now touch exactly on the point of vaccine hesitancy. In fact, some people are suggesting we shouldn't even use that term as it might be perceived as negative, and use the other side of the coin, if you will, vaccine confidence. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I think there are reasonable arguments on both sides, and there's been a discussion going on for a while whether we should positively frame it or negatively frame it. The issue with using with confidence as the umbrella term is that it's not just a direct positive complement to hesitancy, because confidence is one factor that gets you from not being non-vaccinated to vaccinated, even from an attitudinal domain side. But I the position I take is actually I like the framework originally developed by WHO, which says that there are folks on one end of the spectrum who refuse all vaccines, on the other end of the spectrum who actively demand vaccines, and in the middle there are people who passively accept vaccines. Sometimes they're unsure, and then there's these true vaccine hesitant people that accept some of the vaccines, delay some vaccines, and refuse some vaccines. So
Yeah.
a spectrum based approach, which is context specific, which is vaccine specific, and having the understanding that this can be influenced by many factors, is, I think, the way to go.
Yeah, and I like that articulation of it, Saad, and I'd add one nuance to that, and I just want to be quick to say it, is that sometimes vaccine hesitancy is legitimate. In
Yeah.
other words, these are people who have legitimate questions, legitimate fears that deserve to be addressed, and that's sometimes harder, as you say, when it's vaccine and context specific, for vaccines that the public doesn't have any real understanding of. They think of mRNA vaccines as something brand new. Well, they are brand new in terms of widespread use, but most of them are quite surprised to think these were actually first conceived of in 1960, and active investigation began 30 years ago in 1990. So, without that kind of background that you and I share, it's very hard for them to put that into context.
I absolutely agree.
So, Saad, I want to get to something that you are the best person to speak about because you did the study. Talk to us about the study you did on the determinants of COVID-19 vaccine acceptance in the US, and kind of highlight for us, let's take a little time on this, highlight for us the major findings, because I feel they're important.
So yeah, so we did one of the earliest studies around COVID-19 vaccines acceptance, because unlike a lot of folks, we thought that we should be aware of um, attitudinal barriers to vaccine acceptance, even when before the vaccines came out, because this is not the first new vaccine introduction that we have been engaged with as a world and as our research group. And so we did a national study on May 8th, as I recall correctly, 2020. So over a year ago. And at that time, the narrative was that sort of, since everyone is clamoring for a way out of this pandemic, everyone will accept the vaccine. One of the things we found was that in that, thinking about that spectrum, that while those who were on the vaccine demand side were actually more enthusiastic than usual. So their numbers were not necessarily larger, but they were more enthusiastic. So they ended up being more vocal, and that created an impression that people are clamoring for the vaccine. So therefore, that people took that as a heuristic for the rest of the group.
Yes.
We also found that there were a lot of people in the wait and see category, and people who were sort of, as I sometimes say, that sometimes if even if you put mom and apple pie in a shot, some people will not take it. So that group was small, but a bit larger than usual. So we see that phenomenon in every vaccine. In this case, what was concerning that it was a little bit larger. And then since then, others have done these other follow-up studies to say that the wait and see group is shrinking, which is encouraging, but there are other sort of remaining signs of concern. We even at that time found demographic and geographic disparities in acceptance. So certain regions within the U.S. had sort of certain regions in the U.S. were more prone to vaccine hesitancy, etc. But also by race, it was higher by race and demographic status. So younger people had more hesitancy than older people. People of color at that time had more hesitancy. Now that gap is narrowing with some effort. We also found potential avenues of intervention, and this is relevant to what we are doing here today, that the highest level of confidence in COVID-19 information was from healthcare providers and public health officials. And so that is, to quote from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. So healthcare providers, physicians, nurses have a huge responsibility because of that trust to get to know the communication methods, et cetera, around these vaccines. And we at that time highlighted the need for targeted evidence-based community messaging through healthcare providers and public health officials to increase vaccine acceptance. So that's in a nutshell what we found.
I want to just put a big amen on that in the sense that as healthcare providers, we have a heavy responsibility in terms of addressing vaccine hesitancy, building vaccine confidence, and addressing the questions that our patients come to us with. So with that, let's talk about the value of vaccinations. In our society, not necessarily true in other societies, we are a me rather than we culture. So healthcare choices become focused on the individual. What's in it for me? But vaccines are really meant as a broader healthcare intervention for the greater good, that is, at the population. This might be particularly true for children, for example, where they may not be at the same level of risk. So how do we communicate around that truth?
So there are several layers for it. So the first thing is to make sure that we pay attention to all groups and highlight their individual benefits. So even in groups like children, etc., although the risk benefit calculus is much more stark for older populations,
yes,
even for children, and especially teens, etc., the risk benefit calculus is still heavily in favor of vaccination. So communicate that there's individual benefit, but also frame that, and we actually tested that with in trials, in messaging trials, that a community-based message actually does resonate with people. And especially if it's paired with this phenomenon of anticipated regret, that how would you feel that if you are engaged, if some of your activities around vaccination and vaccine acceptance contributes to an outbreak. So communicating that effectively, politely, with nuance is helpful. But also our work found that speaking to people's values is also important.
So, Saad, as we wrap up here, maybe could you give us something practical for our listeners? How do we engage with our patients? Many of us have found that we're the primary information source, not only for our family, but for friends and for other people in the community. So can you kind of give us an outline of how we might do that?
So there are several approaches of it, and we can put in resource links to various guides we have developed and others have developed. But essentially, you should think about being prepared and now the next phase of the pandemic will be where vaccine delivery will happen with heavy involvement of healthcare providers. If someone is coming for their sort of routine visits, we will expect providers to ask for their vaccination status and then sort of counsel them around it. So be prepared and be conscious of what are some of the themes that are emerging. So there are a lot of social listening tools that are out there. Listen. Listen with empathy, uh, both in terms of what misinformation is going around, but what your patients are telling you. And sometimes in the acute phase of that, it's maybe not in the long run. If you are in a group practice situation, have a discussion with other providers in your practice, so saying what they're hearing, how they're dealing with it. So that kind of listening, not just at the individual level, but building your own sort of group listening mechanism is helpful. Understand and develop actionable insight. So what they are truly saying. So if it is an information gap, are they just concerned about a few things that they heard in the news, for example? Is this true disinformation, which requires, and I'll come to if there is true misinformation where you have to rebut that. I'll take a second after the big picture. How do you do that? But if it is something like that, mRNA vaccines will modify my DNA, and then engage in terms of strategically. Sometimes you have to inoculate to content if it is a theme that you're seeing again and again in your sort of clinical setting, and then sort of monitor in a way what is working and what is not working. Coming to myth correction, if you have to address myths, but you don't have to address it every time, you have to figure out what is worth addressing. If it's salient, if it's repeated a lot of times, then don't start with the fallacy. Start with the fact.
Yeah.
Then label a fallacy, a myth, as a myth in the very next step. Then go to the fallacy. What is the actual fallacy? For example, mRNA vaccines do not sort of interact with your DNA because they go to your protein manufacturing machinery directly in the cytosol, etc. For example, it's sort of that's
Right.
as an example of what the fallacy is, and then sort of end with the fact in terms of the data on their safety, etc. So fact, warning, fallacy, fact is an approach to dealing with misinformation directly. So so that's in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I want to summarize, first of all, by thanking the Professor Omer for your expertise and for being with us today, and conclude by saying, as we enter the next phase of vaccine rollout, there will continue to be challenges. We need to learn how to cater our communication and anticipate those COVID-19 questions and conversations with our patients. We've heard some great tips today from Dr. Omer on how to engage and discuss COVID-19. Key points I heard are to listen with empathy, which means listening to understand, not listening to reply, and the high value of establishing trust. So, Saad, thanks for being with me today, and I think our listeners will find this very helpful.
My pleasure.